Welcome to Happy Homes and Gardens. I'm your host. My name is Daphne Royce. I am a real estate broker, architecture, and interior designer. Everyone looks for a job after college, but not everyone is lucky enough to find their dream job. Emblem Search helps you achieve your job goals. Let's welcome Ben Lewis, who is the founder of Emblem Search, to share his insights. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Daphne. Appreciate you having me.
Please tell us who you are and what Emblem Search does.
Yeah, at the core, I'm a recruiter. Been in it for about 6 years now, and recently, about a month ago, started my own candidate search practice. I guess the best way to think about me is a headhunter. So I find very specific people on behalf of companies, typically within software and other tech. Most of those companies being early to growth stage organizations, most of those also being VC backed. So on one hand, I'll work for the founders of a company to perhaps find somebody out of a competing organization, an industry target, something along those lines. On the other hand, I'll often work at the request of venture capital organizations to find co-founders and other key people as an early stage company is getting their feet on the ground.
Finding special people, are you only focusing in the Bay Area, California, or over the country?
That's a great question. I work all over the country, and I've also worked within Canada and Australia. But I would say probably 98% of my searches tend to be for companies that are in the Bay Area. Occasionally, I'll stretch outside of that. Um, I think the last couple of years have really tilted us towards remote work as well. So many of those searches will end up being for people that are, based all over the country, but those companies oftentimes are here in the Bay Area. And I think that's purely based on my network. I do a lot of in-person networking here in the city in Silicon Valley, and so you meet people, their companies are typically around here, and it just kind of naturally progresses that way.
What is the most challenging part of finding a good position or a good candidate?
So if we start with the candidate side of things, I think the most challenging part of finding somebody is they might be virtually invisible online. A big part of that is not really filling out their LinkedIn profile or anything like that deeply enough. I think people are used to finding a job themselves and reaching out, to that job listing with their resume, and they don't think about how they position themselves online through their LinkedIn profile. And I know that LinkedIn can turn some people off. They're not really into, being active on that platform, but at least making your LinkedIn profile match your resume is super important for me to be able to find you. To give a little bit more context to that, I use keywords to find people. There's millions of members on LinkedIn. I think there's something like 11 million people on LinkedIn. And out of all of those people, the only way I can find, the candidate that I'm looking for is based on what keywords they have on their profile. If I can't see that, you're a salesperson, you've sold into HR managers, for example, within this size of company, something like that, I can't find you. So I think the biggest challenge is, I would say, at least half of the candidates that could be really great for my clients don't have their profile filled out very deeply, and it becomes very difficult for me to actually locate them at all for those companies. If we're talking about a company finding the right or a person finding the right position, I should say, at the end of the day, I think those profiles are listed, or those job descriptions are listed. They're pretty easy to find on LinkedIn, well found, Indeed, places like that. The biggest problem right now is, if you ask any hiring manager, they probably, if I posted a VP of marketing position, for example, on behalf of a client of mine, I would probably receive 500 applicants within 2 days. The question is, how do you stand out? How can you, it's not locating the job, it's actually getting yourself to the top of the pile when there's that many people, and it's so easy to automatically apply. I know we can talk about that a little bit further down the line here, but setting yourself apart is the most challenging part. How do you not blend in with all of these other people? And once again, that comes back to this idea of creating a really tailored profile, really tailored resume that has the exact keywords that a company like the one you want to work for is going to be looking for. And that could be just from somebody like myself scanning a resume. It could be from a software tool that they're using to automatically sort different profiles through resume submissions, through LinkedIn profiles, things like that. Either of those scenarios require a very finely tuned resume in order to really stand out.
That was a very good point. I actually networking a lot. I heavily use LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
But I do find people often that they don't have a LinkedIn will tell me that they're not active on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
What do you recommend people how often they have to update, how much information they should include in their LinkedIn profile?
I recommend a lot. Um, my Here's my take. If you want to get in front of the best positions and the most desirable companies, you need to make it easy for the people at those companies to understand who you are. This is more than just explaining what you do in your job. You need to give them an opportunity to look at who you are as a person outside of your job description. And that's half of the interview is the getting to know you process. And if you have a huge opportunity there on your profile to be able to talk about what motivates you, to give them an idea of what types of companies you're really, really engaged with and really, desire to work at. And so I recommend putting a lot on your LinkedIn profile. I think for your about section, it's a really good idea to talk about what areas you're passionate about from a business perspective. That could be industries, that could be reaching a certain customer base if you're in sales or marketing, something like that. Your about section should really have a solid couple of paragraphs in there that talk about what your mission is, where you're looking to be, what really gets you motivated, and then maybe a little bit about yourself. Under your job section, that should look like your resume. Each of those companies should have a kind of a warm up in terms of, where things were at when you joined, what the context of that company's growth was during the period of time you were there, and then go down and really zoom in on what you were responsible for delivering while you were there. I think that should get as detailed as key performance metrics that you were responsible for. That's super important. Not a lot of people put those really fine details. I think that's important on LinkedIn. Folks think that you should leave that off of LinkedIn and only put it on your resume. I don't agree with that. If I'm on LinkedIn, I know how to do a keyword search and find when a salesperson is discussing what percentage they were to quota. And if you're putting that right up there and it's very obvious to me, it's so much easier for me to find you. And it's also very clear to me that you're happy to talk about your performance. So it's a good idea to have it well filled out. Another point that's worth making here is if I have 500 applicants to a job, if those are on LinkedIn and each of those applicants has a resume attached, I have to click into every single one of those resumes. If the LinkedIn profile was completely filled out, I can see everything. I can very, very easily click into each of the companies that this person worked at. It's a snap. It's so much easier. It saves me a lot of time. And frankly, folks that have a really good LinkedIn presence immediately go to the top because it's just easier for me to find all the information that I need to understand what they do and what their performance track record is.
Would that be important to have a contact information, language, a word, or licenses?
Yes, I think the contact information piece probably not as important. I don't necessarily recommend that people put their phone number on their LinkedIn profile. It's so easy. There's so many automated scrapers that can go and find your, and collect that type of information. You'll probably get a lot of spam calls. So I think if you'd like to put your email address, you can. But frankly, if someone is looking for you on LinkedIn, it's really easy for them to send you a message. So that's not as important as that really fine information on your background. In regards to licenses, certifications, degrees, absolutely. Super important that all of that is really up to date. And when we're talking about recent graduates, I think it's a good idea to have not just your degree, but a bit of information below that, maybe a few bullet points on specific, what was your major, what was your minor, what are certain projects that maybe you worked on that you would want to highlight. If you went to business school and, let's say you did a project in which you actually were able to deploy with a company to help them with financial analysis, something like that, that needs to be talked about. The same thing would go for a software engineer. If they had an opportunity, whether that be an internship or an opportunity through a professor of theirs to work with a company and deliver code or get involved with the engineering organization, that's something that should definitely be discussed. So yeah, as much detail as possible. I think, in my opinion, don't hold back. Make the two of those, the resume and your LinkedIn profile match as much as possible.
What do you recommend job seekers to prepare them for a job search?
Good question. My most important piece of advice that I could give to anyone is truly understand what industry, what type of company, what size of company you offer the most value to. If you're just submitting applications to every random company that has a job title that looks like it's within your wheelhouse. If you're an account executive, for example, if you work in sales and you're applying to every account executive role that's posted on LinkedIn, on Indeed, on Wellfound, anything like that, without any thought about essentially what that company does and whether or not you've really had experience in that area, you're wasting your time. Certain if you're fresh out of college, absolutely, please do. I think it's a good idea to get a lot of exposure to different industries. But if you've already started your career and you've worked in one particular industry, if you're a salesperson and you've sold into technology decision makers, CTOs, heads of IT, things like that. You need to keep in mind whether or not this company you're applying to sells into those same decision makers. You also need to keep in mind what the stage of that company was and how you can align yourself with those types of growth stages of companies. If you can get really, really specific with that and then form a list of companies that seem like they would be ideal for you to apply to or reach out to, that's the most effective approach in this market. I would always recommend starting with a lot of Google research in terms of building a list of prospects. This is, familiar to you. You're in real estate. I've been in sales for a long time. Selling yourself is as much of a sales job as anything else. It's really important to actually build a list of companies that you feel like you'd be able to offer a lot of value to. Understand very deeply how you offer value to those companies, and make sure that your resume, your LinkedIn profile, and your outreach to those companies clearly is aligned with that value that you can provide, and you will automatically stand out from everybody else. Because I guarantee you that 98% of people who are in that applicant pool are not doing that.
Where are the good places to looking for job postings?
I primarily am on LinkedIn, but I know that another really good site that I've seen great activity from is called Wellfound. That used to be called Angel List, and it's a job board. They've also got a bunch of other cool features, a great newsletter for early stage startup news and things like that. But they have excellent job listings for very early stage companies. If you're, really excited about, let's say, seed stage and Series A companies, that's a great place to get in front of some good job listings. And those are across a pretty wide range of different career fields. Could be sales, marketing, engineering, product, accounting, and finance, you name it. If you're an engineer, a really good place to go is also Stack Overflow. Um, I've definitely seen some good listings out of that site. And another thing that's nice about them is you're only allowed to post on Stack Overflow if you are the company versus a recruiter like me. So I think a lot of people will get direct access and really understand who is hiring through a website like that. But as I said, they're only technical. You're not going to find any sales jobs on Stack Overflow.
Now we know where to looking for a job. How can the cover letter and also resume stand out?
Good question. I think to bring this back to that focus on, the companies that you really understand where you deliver value to, your resume needs to speak to your accomplishments within those specific industries. Simply talking about if you're a salesperson or a marketing person, simply talking about how you've met your quota, responsibilities, things like that, without discussing specific contributions into a certain industry, who you've sold to, what the stage of that company that you've worked in has been at, what that growth has looked like, you're only giving half of the picture. So my recommendation is there's a couple of pieces here. First of all, I think it's really important for a person to discuss the stage that the company was at and give some background context. If you joined as employee number 100 in a startup, that's very different in terms of what your experience and what your contribution has been than if you joined as employee number 1,000. And hiring managers need to be able to see that very easily. You should be making it as easy on them as possible to understand, what that background context is, what types of growing pains, key milestones and things like that within that company's expansion have you been a part of. The next piece that's really important here is getting as granular as possible with performance information and other, let's say, deliverables. What key outcomes have you driven? The best way to think about this is quantitative rather than qualitative. How do you, instead of talking about, if you have a sales resume, talk less about vague statements about how you successfully sold a large deal into a leading HR software provider, or into a healthcare system. You need to say was responsible for leading and closing a $6 million deal into Athena Health, with these specific stakeholders being the primary people that you reached out to. You need to get as specific as possible. The vague language on resumes is the number one thing that gets them disregarded. And the same thing goes for the cover letter. I think a long cover letter it's not going to get read. It needs to be short, it needs to be concise. I don't think that a letter is even the best word for it now, because the best way to approach this is perhaps to have 3 introductory sentences on who you are, what motivates you, and why you think you'd be a great fit for this company. That should be typically, I'm a great performer. I have experience selling into the same customer that you do. And maybe something about yourself that's interesting that they might not know. And then let's say 3 or 4 bullet points below that are very clear and concise, that talk about your performance, why you'd be a great fit for this company, and that's it. The 3 paragraphs, people just don't have time to read that much when job postings are getting so many applications right now. The next piece that's worth discussing here is The cover letter's purpose at least in my line of work, is not to attach to your resume necessarily, but to use as a tool to reach out to hiring managers proactively. If you want to get the best interviews with the best companies nowadays, it's really worth it to go out on LinkedIn and find the hiring manager of that particular role that's been posted. Oftentimes that means using LinkedIn Premium. It's $50. They have a free trial for a month. It's worth doing. Guarantee you, it's a very valuable tool. And reach out to those people and shoot them a quick note. Shoot them an in-mail, just letting them know, hey, I applied to this position. I know you have 400 other applicants. Wanted to make sure that you noticed me here. Here's why I'd be an excellent fit for this based on my experience in XYZ industry. Bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. Thank you for your consideration. That's it. The cover letter is your sales letter, in my opinion. It's there's way too many applicants flying around these days for a hiring manager to reasonably be able to read every single cover letter.
Do you know the percentage people will get called back for the interview? And also, do they still do an in-person interview now?
It's a great question. Most first round interviews are always going to be Zoom. Percentages of callbacks are very low these days compared to what they used to be. It's when I say that I'll get 500 applicants for a role in 2 days, I mean it. It's just there's so many people that are flowing in. It's just not reasonably possible for me to actually get back to every single one of those people with a personalized message versus, you know, an automated email saying, hey, thank you for your submission, but we're going with other candidates. So, you know, here's another piece of information that's worth highlighting. I think going back to what I was saying before about reaching out to the hiring manager directly. If I receive 500 applicants for a role, I might have 10 of those people actually send me a message on LinkedIn. I've placed so many people who have sent me the message on LinkedIn because it's so obvious for me. I know that these are the areas in which you'd be great for this company. You're telling me right up front why you're awesome for this role. You're being proactive. It's such an easy way to just go a bit above and beyond and really show that you're interested in this position, and it works super well. The people that I know who are getting the best interviews with the most desirable companies, this is whether it's engineers, product people, marketing, sales. You don't have to be a salesperson to reach out to somebody. If you're an engineer and you send somebody a message, you're one of very, very few people who are willing to do that. It's more natural for a salesperson to send a message to a hiring manager. If you're an engineer and you do that, you're one of maybe 3 people in the entire applicant pool who is willing to do that. And it's a slam dunk. It's the best way to get that callback, honestly. Most people, like myself, as someone who runs job listings online, I always get back to those people who reach out to me.
That's very interesting. Often I look at a job posting, but I am very confused about the job position. How
Yeah,
can a company market better for their ideal candidate?
it's a good question. I think there's 2 pieces to this. First of all, job listings oftentimes are not as focused as they need to be. There's no reason to put soft skills like great communicator or highly motivated in a job description. Generally speaking, most really desirable jobs, if you're not a great communicator and you're not highly motivated, you're not going to get hired anyway. And so I think getting as specific as possible and not taking up space with anything besides like the requirements for the job and a description of exactly what this person is going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. That's wasted space. It needs to be trimmed down. It needs to be highly specific so that people are very, very clearly able to see how this lines up with their experience. I think There's a couple of other pieces here. One thing that's really helpful is describing what this person will be responsible for on a 30-day, 60-day, and 90-day basis. What are you going to be working on the second that you walk in the door? Make it as specific as possible to the company's actual initiatives they have going on. If your responsibility is going to be to walk in the door and improve search engine marketing on behalf of a company, that needs to be very specifically put in there. This person will immediately be responsible for, making qualitative, quantitative assessments to search engine marketing, budgets, campaigns, and so forth within 30 days. By 60 days, we're expecting these types of improvements. By 90 days, this person will be taking on these types of additional responsibilities. Be very specific. Another piece in terms of the required experience, start off with what your absolute non-negotiable requirements are, and then have a short list of nice to have, bonus points. Beyond that, I think everything else is fluff. Just if you trim it down, make it really specific, it's going to attract better candidates who really want to get to the point, who are business minded and want to see companies that feel the same. So, I think that's a big piece. Another important note here is when you see a job description and they're giving you a bit of information on the company, let's say an introductory paragraph or two on, we are XYZ organization and here's why we're awesome. Using emotional appeals about why this is a great place to work is not the best approach these days. The highest performing people, the most business-minded candidates that are going to make the most impact within your company, they need to be approached like you're pitching a VC, like you're pitching somebody for funding. You need to be talking about, here's the background of the company. Here's the track record of the founders, the investors, and the advisory. Here's what their previous wins have been. Here's where we're at from a funding perspective. Here's the competitive landscape. Here's where we are from, let's say, a product market fit perspective, or if you're really early, have you achieved minimum viable product? Here's where we're going. Here are the challenges. Here are the opportunities. Getting as specific as possible and pitching them like you really mean it. Like, this is somebody that's potentially a co-founder or somebody that's going to give you money. That works really, really well with candidates as well. Even if they're folks who are just starting their career off, if they see something like that, they're going to really take this seriously. And I don't think enough companies are forthcoming enough in that initial description of their organization to attract the highest performers. Oftentimes you don't see that type of information until you receive a message from somebody like me. I think companies could be putting that in their messaging for their job description, and they would get way, way better applicants.
Okay, let's assume that you're lucky enough to get an initial interview.
Mm-hmm.
How often and when should a person follow up after an interview?
Good question. So super important for you to send a thank you note immediately. So that's just, job interviewing 101. Make sure to send a thank you note. In that thank you note, be sure to call out something from the interview, especially something maybe that was shared by one of the interviewers that was something personal, something they really like about their job, something that you noticed that you want to let them know you were listening. Make that personal note in there to make this personal, to make them remember who you are. I would follow up after that within about 2 business days to find out about status. I generally find that hiring managers that I work with typically will debrief on candidates the following day. They will have a morning meeting, let's say 8 or 9 a.m., and they'll talk about the people that they interviewed the previous day. So if you're waiting, giving them a full day the next day, and then reaching out and finding out what your status is the next day, that's a good cadence. Another really important note here is you need to close the next round of interviewing, close them as in selling to them during that interview. You need to ask them what next steps look like. If there's anything else that you could clarify, any potential questions or concerns that they might have, ask when to expect an update on next steps and what those next steps are. That's a critical piece, especially for sales and marketing. But I've also seen that being a really critical decision-making factor in technical and product roles that shows engagement, it shows commitment from this person to that interview process. It's really easy to do. It's as simple as asking what the next steps look like and how you could best position yourself to get the next round of interviewing. It goes a really long way. And I've seen hiring managers that pass one candidate versus another just based on whether or not they ask those questions during the interview.
Wow. And what is the best attire and demeanor appropriate for an interview?
Great question. If you work in tech, you don't need to wear a suit and tie. I think that suit with no tie is a good look, but business casual in general is fine. Collared shirt, slacks, look nice, but not too formal. There's one exception. If you work in finance or accounting, suit and tie are required. That is still a cultural norm in any, and even if this is within a software company, if you are a financial analyst, if you're going to be in a financial planning and analysis position, something like that, it's always a good idea to wear the tie, because the person who you're interviewing with, even if they're working at a company where everybody wears t-shirts, that person might have started their career in investment banking or something like that, and they might just have that kind of that set of values that they feel like people should at least begin with a suit and tie. So if you're not in finance and accounting, just wear a collar, you'll be fine. If you are in finance and accounting, yeah, keep it more formal. And I would recommend the same over Zoom. Even if you're on Zoom, wear the tie. if it's an accounting position, wear the tie. Otherwise, I think just a shirt like this is totally fine if you're an engineer, if you're a salesperson, anything like that.
That's great to know. Do you help people with the temporary jobs, internships, and permanent positions?
I am primarily responsible for permanent hire positions. And there's a big reason for this. I'm typically brought in to find very specific people. I'm a headhunter. Oftentimes, I'd say probably 60% of the work I do is executive search. Those are generally permanent hire positions. I do occasionally see contract roles where, let's say, a CTO is doing a trial run with a company, especially if it's a startup. They might do a trial run for about 6 months where they're being paid, under 1099 as a contractor, just to get a feel for the team, for them to really, if this is a position that's essentially a co-founder of a company, I think the investors, the advisory, the founders really need to understand how well they work together before they commit to bringing this person on board, as a permanent hire. And I actually find that especially if you're a C-level executive and you're looking for new roles, and getting kind of proactive in the market, a really, really good place to start is in a fractional capacity. So you're working maybe 20 hours a week, you're working under 1099, and that gives you a chance to feel them out, see where the company is at personality wise, and kind of uncover any skeletons that might be in their closet, and they'll be doing the same for you. Works really well for everybody. But in terms of where most of my work is done, 99.9% is permanent.
Have you ever run into people who want to change their careers?
Happens all the time. Yeah, I think the best advice that I've been able to give people, let's say if you're if you are in sales and you want to get into marketing or something like that, or maybe you're in consulting and you want to get into a software company instead of being on the services side of that, my advice is always to find common ground. If you're in consulting and you're selling to large healthcare organizations, for example, let's say you're at PwC, you're selling consulting engagements for large healthcare organizations to sell them software implementation and professional services afterwards. The best type of company for you to attempt to go into in terms of, a career change going into software is a health tech company, a company that also sells software to healthcare organizations. It's a really easy transition. I think finding that common ground could be the same thing for moving from sales into marketing. Any of those fields, it's really, really important to avoid wasting your time by figuring out what's the most easy way for you to actually still have value and familiarity with the industry of the new role that you want to be kind of exploring, and really highlight that value. Um, that's the best way to kind of form a bridge that's not going to result in you taking too much of a reduction in compensation by changing careers.
That's great to know. Thank you so much. That was very insightful.
Mhm.
And please tell us where to find your website and how people can reach out to you.
Absolutely. My website is emblemsearch.com. That's EMBLEMSEARCH.com. My email is ben@emblemsearch.com. I'm on LinkedIn probably 7 hours a day. So you can always find me on LinkedIn as well. I try to post useful content there and engage with other folks as often as possible as well. So I look at and answer every inbound message that I get on LinkedIn. So would love to hear from you there as well.
Thank you so much, Ben. I appreciate your time, and hopefully this will help people to find their dream jobs.
Absolutely, Daphne. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.